You want to control because you are afraid, and that fear, though you may not admit it, governs you more than you think. You dress it as prudence, call it responsibility, disguise it as love or order, but it is still fear. Fear that things might go wrong, that people might change, that the world might not work according to your rules. You want the power to avoid pain, to predict chaos, to make sure nothing escapes. But the hardest truth is that while you try to control life, life is controlling you. The desire for control is like fire. At first it warms, gives security, illuminates the path. But if you feed it too much, it ends up consuming everything in its way, starting with you. You think mastering every detail will make you free, when in reality it makes you a prisoner of constant anxiety. You wake up thinking about what could go wrong, replay conversations, correct what no one noticed, anticipate mistakes that don't even exist yet. You never rest, because inside you there's always a watchman awake. Epictetus said, "It's not things that disturb man, but the opinions he has about them." Control is born right there, in interpretation. You want everything to be predictable so you don't have to face the uncertainty of your own emotions. You don't fear external chaos, you fear the internal one. You're afraid of what you'd feel if things got out of control. That's why you keep trying again and again, as if the world should submit to your plan so that you can be at peace. But peace is not negotiated with the universe, it's trained in the mind. Marcus Aurelius, the emperor who ruled half the world, wrote that it's not worth fighting against what nature imposes. He who could move armies and issue decrees learned to let go of what didn't depend on him, because he understood that absolute control is an illusion, and serenity only arises when you accept your powerlessness before the uncontrollable. That acceptance is not weakness, it's maturity. It's the moment you choose to protect your energy and let life flow without trying to bend it to your will. The controlling mind lives in constant vigilance. It checks messages, interprets silences, anticipates responses, plans imaginary scenarios. It doesn't trust time, doesn't trust others, and deep down, doesn't trust itself either. Every time it tries to control, what it's really trying to do is soothe an insecurity it doesn't want to face. It wants guarantees where there are only probabilities, certainties in a world built on change. But nature doesn't obey human anxiety. It has its rhythm, its form, its mystery. Seneca wrote that to live serenely is to live according to nature, and nature never hurries. No tree forces its fruit to ripen, no river rushes its course to please anyone. Everything has its season and its measure, even you. That's why every time you feel the urge to control, you are denying the natural flow of life. You're saying, "I don't trust the process." But control doesn't prevent suffering, it only delays it and multiplies it. The need for control is a lack of faith disguised as strategy. Faith not in the religious sense, but in the vital one, in your ability to adapt, to respond, to endure. To trust time, others, and the unfolding of events is not naivety. It's wisdom, because the one who trusts doesn't surrender to chance. They surrender to the understanding that not everything needs their hand on it to go well. Imagine, just for a moment, your life without that need to oversee everything. Think of the relief of not checking every message, not replaying every conversation in your head, not thinking 3 times about what you already did. Think of the rest it would be to live without that tension that follows you like a shadow. Controlling is believing you can predict the ocean with a bucket. Letting go is learning to swim in it. Breaking the need for control is an act of radical courage, because by doing so, you accept that not everything will go as you expect. But you also discover that even when the outcome changes, you remain yourself. That your worth doesn't depend on the order of things, but on the calm with which you move through them. This is where Stoicism becomes a living practice, not in mastering the world, but in mastering your reaction. There is a freedom that emerges when you understand this. You can't control the tide, but you can decide how to hold the oars. You can't stop the storm, but you can decide whether you'll sink or stay afloat. Control seeks power, letting go seeks wisdom, and between the two, the latter always wins. So before moving forward, breathe. You don't need to master everything to be at peace. You only need to learn to be present without demanding that the world bend to you. This is not a journey of surrender, but of recovery, recovery of trust, recovery of balance, recovery of the serenity you lost while trying to make everything perfect, because the only thing you can truly control, and the only thing worth controlling, is yourself. Before we begin, I want you to declare your commitment by leaving in the comments, "From today, I let go of what I can't control." That phrase will be your anchor amid chaos. A reminder that you are here to reclaim your freedom, not to remain a prisoner of what doesn't depend on you. You've carried for too long the anxiety of making everything work, the burden of holding everyone together, the guilt of not being able to foresee it all. Today, that stage ends. This is the moment to release the illusion of control and choose serenity. Letting go is not surrendering, it's trusting. It's understanding that your power doesn't lie in mastering the world, but in mastering yourself. Breathe, let go, and get ready, because what's coming is not just a lesson, it's the beginning of a new way of living. Without further preamble, let's begin. First, Stoic lesson: distinguish the controllable from the uncontrollable. Everything begins when you realize you've spent your entire life fighting ghosts. You try to control what others think, what fate prepares, what time decides. You exhaust yourself in battles you cannot win, wearing yourself out trying to fix what never depended on you. And yet you're surprised when frustration arrives, as if you didn't know that battle was lost from the start. It's not bad luck, it's a bad distribution of your energy. Epictetus said it bluntly: some things depend on us, others do not. That phrase, as simple as it is brutal, contains the entire structure of the Stoic soul. What's controllable are your judgments, your decisions, your way of interpreting what happens. What's uncontrollable is everything else: the weather, opinions, chance, death, even love, when it stops being reciprocated. But our mind, anxious for dominion, mixes both worlds. It tries to rule what belongs to the universe and abandons what should be its only kingdom, itself. Your suffering begins there, not in the events themselves, but in the attempt to own what's not yours. When you believe that if you do more, think more, speak more, you'll be able to force the course of events. But nothing outside of you can be tamed without violence. That's why control exhausts you. It's a disguised form of resistance against the inevitable. Every time you demand that things be as you wish, you break your inner peace. Stoic wisdom consists in reversing that equation. Stop demanding from the world and start demanding from yourself. Not to control the external, but to educate your response. Not to impose, but to observe. When you learn to recognize that limit, something almost miraculous happens. The weight of life lightens. Suddenly you discover you don't need to understand everything to be calm, that the world can be chaotic, but you don't have to be. Control is born of fear, acceptance, of understanding. When you realize that every event is woven from thousands of causes that don't depend on you, you stop asking the universe for explanations. And then silence becomes wisdom. The Stoics were not passive, they were selective. They knew that every impulse must be directed toward what can truly be changed: character, mind, will. Marcus Aurelius wrote that serenity of the soul comes when you limit your field of action to what is within your control. You have power over your mind, not over external events, he said. If you practice that distinction every day, you begin to notice a different kind of peace, almost physical. You wake up without the burden of wanting the world to obey you. You begin to feel part of the flow, not its obstacle. It's not about resignation, but about recognizing where your reach ends. Resignation says, "I can do nothing." Wisdom says, "This doesn't belong to me." The first paralyzes. The second liberates. And it's there, right at that limit, where true freedom begins. Inner freedom doesn't appear suddenly. It's trained in small gestures. Every time you choose not to react to provocation, you strengthen your mastery. Every time you release an expectation, you clear space within yourself. Every time you remember that life doesn't owe you certainty, only experience, something inside you aligns. The control you seek outside is, in reality, a reflection of the control you haven't exercised within. When your mind is weak, it demands obedience from the world. When your mind is strong, it governs itself. That's why Stoicism insists so much on self-discipline, because there's no greater power than directing your own thoughts. If you don't master your judgment, fear will lead your life, and fear never leads calmly. It will make you suspect, overthink, and try to manipulate what you love. Thus, without realizing it, your desire to protect everything becomes the root of your anxiety. Epictetus taught that the first task of the wise is to distinguish, to separate what can be changed from what cannot. The mind, he said, becomes ill when it confuses that boundary. If you try to modify the past, correct others, or anticipate the future, your spirit is torn in 1,000 directions. But if you focus your attention only on your present action, the noise fades. That's when life begins to obey. Not because you control it, but because you flow with it. The paradox is that the less you try to control everything, the more power you gain over yourself. Whoever tries to hold the river ends up drowned. Whoever learns to swim in its current advances. Absolute control is a childish illusion, a denial of change. But wisdom recognizes that change is not an enemy, but the stage on which virtue is tested. You can't stop the tide, but you can adjust your sail. You can't avoid the storm, but you can decide your attitude toward it. That's the difference between the fool and the wise. The first breaks trying to change the inevitable. The second strengthens himself by learning to adapt. The secret lies in one simple, radical act. Observe without demanding. When you see something that irritates you, ask yourself if it's under your control. If the answer is no, let it go without guilt. It's not indifference, it's emotional hygiene. Let the world turn without your permission. It doesn't need your anxiety to function. Whoever distinguishes the controllable from the uncontrollable saves themselves from 1,000 wars. Life doesn't stop being complex, but it stops being unbearable. You no longer fight against what doesn't depend on you. You fight only to be worthy of yourself. That's the battle you can truly win. Stoic practice begins in the everyday, when traffic frustrates you, when someone doesn't respond as you expected, when life doesn't fit your plan. Instead of resisting, observe. Instead of reacting, choose. Each such moment becomes invisible training, a gymnastics of the soul. To distinguish the controllable from the uncontrollable is a form of self-love. It's accepting that not everything must pass through your hands to have value. What you control is your attitude. What you don't belongs to fate. In that balance, true temperance is born, not that of one who doesn't feel, but that of one who feels without losing their center. And when you achieve that, when you let the world be the world without asking its permission, something within you settles. You discover that life didn't need to be dominated, only understood. And there, in that serene understanding, the need for control finally dissolves. Second Stoic lesson: accept uncertainty as your teacher. Everything you try to secure excessively eventually slips from your hands. Life, by its very nature, was not made to obey your plans. It's a field that shifts with the wind, a tide that asks no permission. And yet, we live as if every event should conform to our expectations. We want certainties, guarantees, endings written in advance. But the universe signs no contracts with anyone. That is Seneca's first great lesson. Nothing belongs to man except time. Everything else is on loan, and any loan can be reclaimed at any moment. Uncertainty is not the enemy. It is the law that keeps existence alive. Without it, there would be no learning, no surprise, no growth. If everything were predictable, life would be a mechanical repetition. But our mind fears that emptiness, and instead of learning to navigate it, it tries to fill it with control. We plan conversations, anticipate reactions, calculate what others might say. And so, we turn each day into an exhausting act of surveillance. The Stoic learns something different, that uncertainty can be a teacher if faced with humility, because every uncertain situation reveals how dependent you are on your expectations. The more you need things to go as you imagine, the more you will suffer when they change. The rigid soul breaks, the flexible one adapts. Epictetus compared it to a bow. If it's too tight, it snaps. If it has just the right tension, it shoots farther. To accept uncertainty is not to resign, it is to recognize the natural order of things. When you don't know what's coming, you are more alive than ever. You are standing on the field of possibility, and that is where true confidence is born, the kind that doesn't depend on outcomes, but on your ability to respond with virtue to whatever unfolds. The Stoics did not seek to eliminate insecurity, but to transform it into an opportunity to practice serenity. Seneca said it clearly, "Let us expect everything so that we fear nothing." Whoever understands that anything can happen no longer trembles before change. They have rehearsed in their mind loss, frustration, and delay, not to live in sadness, but to strengthen the soul against the inevitable. Uncertainty, when accepted, ceases to be a threat and becomes an ally. It teaches you patience, tolerance, and vision. Without uncertainty, you couldn't recognize your own courage, because courage is not about having guarantees, it's about moving forward despite not having them. Each day, life invites you to a practice, letting go of control over what cannot be known. When you wait for a result, when the answer doesn't come, when a conversation drifts or a plan collapses, you have a choice, to fear or to trust. And trust is not passivity. It is wisdom in motion. It means saying, "I will do my part with excellence, and the rest belongs to fate." Where the anxious person sees a threat, the wise one sees a training ground. Every unexpected turn is a disguised teacher, an opportunity to measure your temperance. There is no evolution without the unknown. There is no growth without uncertainty. What changes shapes you. What escapes your control teaches you to release. Control is not overcome by accumulating certainties, but by strengthening faith in your ability to act with reason, even when the ground shifts. Accepting uncertainty is not weakness, it's the beginning of true freedom. Life doesn't ask permission to change your plans. It does so without warning, and often when you think you have everything under control. One day, it's a conversation that doesn't go as you hoped. Another, it's someone walking away without explanation. Sometimes it's the job you thought was secure, the project that falls apart, the health that falters. The first impulse is to resist, to clench your fist, demand answers, demand control. But the Stoic learns to look beyond the chaos. Every uncertain event is invisible training, an opportunity to test how much you trust yourself, not the circumstances. Epictetus taught that we don't suffer from what happens to us, but from how we interpret what happens. When something goes off script, your mind doesn't react to the event itself, but to the story it tells about it. If you think, "This shouldn't be happening to me," you are fighting reality. And reality, when fought, always wins. The wise person, on the other hand, doesn't argue with fate. They converse with it. They ask, "What are you showing me? What part of me needs to grow stronger through this?" That is the attitude that turns fear into wisdom. To accept uncertainty doesn't mean surrendering to life. It means surrendering to its flow. The difference is immense. Stoic surrender is not passivity. It's the conscious act of letting nature take its course while you continue to act with virtue. Seneca said the wise person sails with the winds that blow, not against them. Not because they are weak, but because they know control lies not in the wind, but in the rudder. And that requires humility. The ego wants to be right, reason wants to learn, the ego seeks stability, wisdom seeks understanding. When you accept uncertainty, the ego dissolves because there is nothing left to defend. Only the present remains and your ability to respond with calm. That's where serenity is born, when you understand that not knowing is also part of the path. The Stoics called this assenting to nature. It's not blind obedience, it's lucid acceptance. It's recognizing that there is a greater order, even if you don't yet understand it. Marcus Aurelius wrote in his Meditations, "What happens is natural, and what is natural cannot be bad." That phrase doesn't erase pain, but it gives it meaning, because even pain, when observed without resistance, becomes a teacher. Look at your life and you'll notice a pattern. Every time something turned out differently than planned, a new possibility also appeared. Maybe you didn't see it at first because you were too busy mourning the loss of control. But with time, you realize that many of the things you now value most were born from chaos, not order. It was uncertainty that forced you to reinvent yourself, to grow, to change direction. And that is its wisest function, to force you to truly live. When you crave certainty, life becomes a cage. You think you're safe, but you're only confined. To control everything is a way of not living, and accepting uncertainty, though it hurts, is an act of freedom. Because when you stop needing guarantees, everything becomes possible. Control seeks safety. Wisdom seeks purpose. That's why the Stoic chooses trust, not because everything is fine, but because they trust their capacity to be fine, even when everything changes. Uncertainty doesn't disappear. It becomes your teacher, and whoever learns from it never fears tomorrow again. Third Stoic lesson: suspend the impulse to anticipate everything. You spend more time in the future than in your own life. You wake up thinking about what might go wrong, what you should say, what could happen if you don't act right now. You plan conversations that will never happen, rehearse arguments that will never exist, prepare for storms that will never arrive. And without realizing it, you become a slave to an illusion, the belief that anticipating everything will save you from pain. But anticipatory control is not security, it is anxiety by another name. The Stoics knew this well. Epictetus warned that human beings suffer more from their imagination than from reality. What hurts you is not what happens, but what your mind invents before it happens. To anticipate is to live the same fear twice, first in fantasy, then in fact. The first time you suffer without reason, the second without strength, and so you wear yourself out, as if your soul were always on guard, restless, waiting for the next blow. The need to anticipate everything is born from the fear of not knowing what to do when something escapes your control. But the paradox is that this attempt at control is precisely what takes it away from you, because when you rush ahead to every possible outcome, you no longer respond from reason, but from urgency. You become reactive, not rational. You lose the clarity the Stoics sought to cultivate, to act only when the event is real. Seneca wrote with the lucidity of one who understood the human soul. We suffer more in imagination than in reality. The anxious mind lives in an invented future, while the present fades before its eyes. The irony is that the more you try to anticipate, the less prepared you actually are, because no amount of foresight teaches serenity, only presence does. Stoic practice is about waiting without drama, not in resignation, but in observation. When something uncertain approaches, the wise person doesn't rush to calculate every possible outcome. They pause, breathe, and ask, "What depends on me right now?" If the answer is nothing, then they keep inner silence. That silence is the highest form of rational action, because when the mind is calm, life reveals what truly needs to be done. Each time you catch yourself imagining the worst-case scenario, practice returning to what's in front of you. Look at it without adding stories. If the present is a problem, solve it. If it isn't, don't invent one. That is true temperance, keeping the mind in its place when the world pushes you forward. The impulse to anticipate everything is a way of running from pain, but also from the present. And the present, though uncomfortable, is the only place where you have power. The Stoics understood this. The future does not yet exist, and the past is no longer within your reach. Only this moment belongs to you. Learning to suspend anticipation is not an act of faith. It's an act of training. It takes practice, like teaching a horse not to bolt at every noise. The mind calms through repetition, returning again and again to the now. The mind that anticipates what will come loses the opportunity to understand what is already happening, because when your attention runs ahead of events, you become an absent witness to your own life. You spend your days solving problems that don't yet exist and carrying burdens no one has placed on you. That's the trap of projected control. Trying to dominate uncertainty robs you of the clarity to act where you actually can. Think of the last time you feared something that never happened. Maybe a confrontation you imagined, an answer you dreaded, a loss that never came. That exercise in imagining catastrophes gives you a false sense of preparation, but in truth, it drains you. Because in every imagined scenario, you spend energy you should be saving for the real moment. Anticipation doesn't strengthen you, it exhausts you. It leaves you empty before the battle even begins. The Stoic does not seek to predict the future, but to be strong for any version of it. Marcus Aurelius put it precisely, be ready for whatever destiny brings. He didn't say, guess what will happen, but be ready. And that difference changes everything. To be ready is to fortify your character, to train your mind to act calmly regardless of the outcome. To anticipate, on the other hand, is to try to manipulate time, believing you can protect yourself from the inevitable. When you learn to let go of anticipation, you discover something greater than control: trust. Not a naive trust that everything will go well, but a sober conviction that you will be capable of responding no matter what happens. That is true Stoic freedom, not dependence on prediction, but reliance on inner preparation. Ask yourself, what part of my life drains me most, the event itself, or my constant attempt to foresee it? If you're honest, you'll see that suffering doesn't come from the event, but from the excess of thought surrounding it. Those hours spent analyzing, anticipating, doubting, those are the real enemies of serenity, not the future, but your resistance to release it. Practice then active waiting, not passivity, but alertness without anxiety. Waiting without fear is one of the highest forms of self-mastery. It means having the courage to let things mature at their own pace. The farmer doesn't pull up the seed to check if it's growing. He trusts the soil, waters it, tends it, and lets time do its work. Life is no different. Interfere too much, and you ruin it. Suspending anticipation is not surrender. It's trusting that your mind will know what to do when the time comes. It's rediscovering confidence in your ability to respond, because within you lies a wisdom that doesn't need to plan every step to remain steady. The Logos, that inner reason the Stoics spoke of, does not live in tomorrow, but in this very moment when you choose to stay calm. So each time you feel the urge to run ahead, repeat silently, "Not yet." Those two words form a border between fear and serenity. "Not yet" reminds you that not everything requires an immediate response, that not every threat is real, that your mind deserves rest before deciding. When you learn to stop the thought before it fires, to breathe before you predict, to observe before you act, the future stops being a prison. Then you understand what the wise have always known. Power does not lie in controlling time, but in inhabiting it. And perhaps there lies the greatest lesson of all. You don't need to know what's coming to be at peace. You only need to be here, present, prepared and calm, because when the moment finally arrives, as it always does, you will face it not with fear, but with the serenity of one who has learned to live one day at a time. Fourth Stoic lesson: practice detachment from the outcome. Everything you do in life carries a shadow, expectation. Expectation is that inner voice whispering that if you do things right, others will notice, that if you give your all, the reward will come, that if you love deeply, the other will respond in kind. But reality, time and again, dismantles that illusion, because the world does not obey your merits, your sacrifices, or your desires. The world follows its course, and you are not at the center of its orbit. The need to control outcomes is born from the fear of uncertainty. We seek guarantees in a universe that offers none. We want every action to have a fair consequence, every effort to bring a visible reward. But life, like nature, does not operate under your laws. Sometimes you sow and do not reap. Sometimes you lose without having done anything wrong. And that hurts. It hurts because you believed the outcome was the measure of your worth. Epictetus said, "Do what you must with what you have and accept what comes." That is the essence of detachment. The outcome is not under your control, only your effort is. You cannot decide if someone will thank you, choose you, or make your plans succeed, but you can decide to act with integrity, calm, and without drama. Stoicism does not ask you for coldness, it asks for freedom. And freedom begins when you do the right thing without expecting applause. Ask yourself, how much of your anxiety really comes from the effort, and how much from obsession with how things will end? We are drained more by the anticipation of the outcome than by the action itself. Because those who expect specific results live in constant frustration. If fate does not comply, they feel betrayed. But the wise person does not expect the universe to adjust to their plans. They adjust their mind to the rhythm of the universe. When you detach from the outcome, something shifts inside. You begin to act for virtue, not for reward. You discover that true satisfaction lies in coherence, not in success. That inner peace does not depend on winning, but on having acted rightly. Virtue becomes its own reward, and then, paradoxically, results tend to improve. Because when you're no longer obsessed with them, your action becomes cleaner, your judgment clearer, your presence steadier. Detachment does not mean indifference or resignation. It means choosing not to suffer for what you cannot control. It means understanding that you can give your best without becoming a prisoner of what comes next. It means releasing the need to guarantee what isn't in your hands. Marcus Aurelius knew this well when he wrote, "Do not demand that things happen as you wish. Accept that they happen as they must, and you will live serenely, that serenity is not passivity. It is a form of power." For those attached to the outcome live tense, vigilant, comparing, measuring. And that perpetual vigilance kills creativity, joy, and connection with the present moment. But those who learn to act without expectation find a kind of fulfillment that nothing external can offer. The mind stops revolving around what will come of this and starts focusing on how to do it well. That is the foundation of Stoic excellence. Not success, but virtue in execution. Imagine the peace of waking each day knowing that your duty is to give your best, regardless of what happens afterward. That the value of your action is not measured by others' reaction, but by the honesty of your intention. That is the beginning of true detachment. Not of someone who renounces the world, but of one who acts fully within it, without being governed by the whims of the result. Detachment from the outcome is, at its core, a form of humility. It is accepting that life has its own order, that your plans are not the center of the cosmos, and that your task is not to dominate it, but to cooperate with it. When you do this, anxiety dissolves and action purifies. You no longer work for recognition, speak to convince, or love to be loved. You do, you speak, and you love because it is your nature to do it well. And in that act you find a freedom that does not depend on victories or defeats. It is the freedom of the wise, to act with a clean soul, even when the world does not applaud. True detachment is trained in the simplest moments of the day. In that conversation you explain calmly even if you're not understood. In that project you complete not knowing if it will be valued. In that love you offer without demanding reciprocity. In every act where you decide to remain yourself, even when the world does not respond as expected. That is the Stoics' terrain. Real life, not theory. Modern society teaches the opposite. It tells you that value lies in achievements, in visible results, in immediate approval. It pushes you to measure your life with borrowed metrics, likes, promotions, applause, validations that dissolve as quickly as they arrive. But Stoicism proposes another measure, quieter and harder, coherence between what you think, what you do, and what you feel. That coherence cannot be bought or displayed, it can only be lived. Seneca wrote it clearly, "Nothing is more pitiful than to occupy one's whole life without ever seeing the fruit of one's efforts." But that fruit is not external recognition, it is inner growth. You don't lose when you fail to achieve what you expected. You lose when you betray your essence to get it. That is why detachment is an act of dignity, a reminder that your value does not depend on the echo, but on the voice that utters it. Practicing detachment also means accepting that not everyone will see your intentions, that some will misread your silences, that others will dismiss your efforts. And still, you will choose to act with virtue, because those who need to be understood to act rightly remain prisoners of applause. The wise act well, even when no one sees them. Their judge is not the crowd, but their conscience. The most common mistake is to confuse detachment with coldness. It is not about living disconnected or without passion. It is about loving with maturity, working with focus, serving with purpose, without letting the outcome dictate your peace. When you expect too much from the external, you hand over your power. But when you give your energy to the right action, the world can move at its own pace without dragging you with it. That is the purest form of control, mastery of oneself. Detachment is also a form of gratitude, because those who are not obsessed with the result learn to value the process. They begin to find beauty in effort, wisdom in mistakes, serenity in uncertain endings. They learn to see every failure as a teacher and every delay as training. They discover that life is not measured by victories, but by the quality of presence with which we face what happens. Think of the ancient artisans. They worked patiently, polishing a piece for days or months, not knowing if anyone would buy it. They didn't do it for fame or fortune. They did it out of respect for their craft. The Stoic does the same with his soul. His work is invisible but enduring. He doesn't seek applause. He seeks inner mastery. That is the essence of detachment, to shape your character like a sculptor shapes stone, without anxiety for the crowd's approval. When you achieve that attitude, even your language changes. You no longer say, "I have to win, but I will do it well." You no longer think, "It must go my way," but "I will do what is right and accept the rest." It's a subtle but radical shift, from tension to balance, from fear to serenity. Detachment doesn't extinguish your fire, it gives it direction. The world will keep turning, results will keep changing, people will keep surprising or disappointing you. But you will have changed your axis. You will no longer live tied to the outcome, but to the manner. Because the way you do things is the only thing that truly belongs to you. And those who master their manner master their destiny, even when they control nothing else. At the end of the day, you can look back and say, "I don't know if I achieved what I wanted, but I acted with integrity." And that phrase, whispered quietly, is worth more than any trophy. Because the soul unbound from outcome lives light, lucid, and free. That is peace dependent on nothing, the peace that belongs only to those who have learned the art of letting go. Fifth Stoic lesson, transform fear into trust. Control is born from fear, not from the desire for precision or the pursuit of excellence, but from the silent fear that if you don't hold tightly to every detail, the world will collapse. That fear disguises itself as responsibility, as care, even as love. But deep down, it is distrust toward life, toward others, toward yourself. What you are trying to master is not the world, but your anxiety about its unpredictability. Epictetus knew this well. It is not what happens that disturbs a man, but his opinion about what happens. When fear rules, your mind creates threats even in neutral events. A silence becomes rejection, a mistake becomes catastrophe, a delay becomes betrayal. The controlling mind lives interpreting dangers where there are only facts, condemning itself to a perpetual vigilance that exhausts the soul. Fear, however, is not the enemy. It is a signal. It is the body warning you that there is something you believe you cannot endure. When you learn to listen to that message without running from it, you turn it into a source of knowledge. The Stoic does not flee from fear. He observes it, translates it, and uses it. He asks, "What is this unease trying to teach me? What part of me still does not trust?" And with those answers, he works silently, without drama, to grow stronger. Fear is inevitable, but slavery to fear is not. We all fear losing: people, security, reputation, control. The difference lies in the response. Those who fear and cling become dependent. Those who fear and accept become free. Seneca explained it clearly. He is not brave who feels no fear, but he who conquers fear. To conquer it is not to suppress it, but to move through it with awareness, allowing it to transform you instead of paralyze you. The controlling mind confuses foresight with protection. It plans every step, anticipates every reaction, preempts every word. And yet, the fear remains, because fear is not cured with plans. It is calmed with trust. A trust that does not come from certainty, but from the habit of sustaining yourself even when nothing goes as expected. That is the Stoic's practice, to remember again and again that you can lose many things, but never your ability to choose your attitude toward what happens. Trust is not naive optimism, it is a quiet certainty. Whatever happens, I will face it with reason. I do not need to control every variable if I know myself. I do not need to anticipate the future if I cultivate the serenity to respond to it when it arrives. At that point, fear ceases to be a barrier and becomes a reminder. You are alive, you are feeling, you are growing. Control seeks guarantee, trust seeks growth. And while the first confines you, the second expands you. Those who trust live open to experience, even to discomfort. They know life is not designed to please them, but to shape them. Every uncertainty becomes a gym for temperance, every unforeseen event a lesson in humility. When you transform fear into trust, your relationship with the world changes. You no longer fight against life, you cooperate with it. You no longer try to make the river flow straight, you learn to navigate its current. Not because you have given up, but because you understand your strength lies not in opposing reality, but in adapting to it without losing your center. Fear will always offer you a story. What if you lose? What if you fail? What if they don't love you? What if you end up alone? But the logos, that inner reason the Stoics spoke of, answers with another. What if you endure? What if you learn? What if you discover you don't need as much as you thought? Between these two voices, your freedom is decided. One diminishes you, the other expands you. You choose which to listen to. Trust is not improvised. It is trained. It is built every time you choose to stay, to breathe, and not to react to chaos. Every time you decide to act from clarity instead of urgency. Every time you allow something to be as it is and discover that you are still all right. That is the Stoic's alchemy, turning tension into strength, fear into temperance, control into freedom. There is a brief but decisive moment when fear can be transformed. It is not a ritual nor a magical thought. It is a single second in which you breathe before responding, and instead of trying to control what happens outside, you choose to govern what happens within. That pause is the true Stoic's territory. It is the moment when the impulse to dominate becomes the art of trusting. To trust does not mean to stop acting, it means to act from a different place, not from the urgency of securing the result, but from the serenity of having chosen what is right. It is a change of axis. Instead of asking, "How do I make sure this doesn't go wrong?" you begin to ask, How can I do it well, even if it does? That single question changes everything: your energy, your focus, your relationship with fear. Fear never disappears from a wise person's life. What changes is the relationship with it. The wise do not run from fear, they welcome it as part of their training. Each time something unsettles them, they examine it calmly and give it purpose. This fear shows me where I still don't trust. This trembling reveals where my mind still clings, and thus what was once a wall becomes a mirror. Imagine a storm. The ordinary man runs, despairs, seeks shelter, and curses the sky. The Stoic instead observes the wind, feels the rain, accepts that he cannot stop it, but he can keep his course. It is not romanticism, it is efficiency. Control tries to fight the inevitable, trust allies with it. Seneca warned that most of our fears are inventions. We worry about what has not yet happened and suffer more in imagination than in reality. We are tormented more by our ideas of evil than by evil itself, he wrote. And it's true. How many nights have you lost to fears that never came true? How much energy have you wasted protecting yourself from ghosts that existed only in your mind? Fear wants security. But absolute security does not exist. Those who seek it become chained. Life, on the other hand, demands flexibility, demands adaptation. The river does not break because it flows. Likewise, the soul that trusts learns to move without losing its shape. In every change, it finds an opportunity to reaffirm its center. Transforming fear into trust is a daily practice. It doesn't happen in great moments, but in small ones, when you accept that you cannot control others' opinions, but you can control the honesty of your words. When you admit that you cannot prevent loss, but you can honor what you had. When you recognize that you cannot avoid pain, but you can choose not to turn it into resentment. Control promises power, but delivers anxiety. Trust promises uncertainty, but gives peace. Not a passive peace, but a living one, the peace of those who act without desperation. Marcus Aurelius said that a tranquil soul is invincible, and it is, because it no longer depends on outcomes. That is the strength born when you stop trying to bend the world and start bending your ego. Look back and think of all the times your need for control stole your serenity, the plans that failed, the conversations that broke, the bonds you suffocated trying to protect. It wasn't malice, it was fear, but you no longer have to live that way. Today you can learn to trust, not in the external, but in yourself. Trust that you will handle whatever comes, that you don't need to know everything to act wisely. That disorder is not always a threat. Sometimes it's the beginning of a new kind of balance. And above all, trust that within you lies something untouched by chaos, the calm that decides, the reason that observes, the soul that endures. To transform fear into trust is, ultimately, an act of love. Love for your peace, your energy, your time. It is to stop living on the defensive and start living from presence. It's not about controlling less, but trusting more. About understanding that what you feared losing was never yours, but what you are, no one can ever take away. Sixth, Stoic lesson: practice conscious surrender. We have been taught that surrendering means failure, that letting go is losing, that releasing something equals weakness. But Stoicism, like a mirror that reverses false beliefs, reminds us of a deeper truth. Not everything you let go of is lost. Many things you release are actually saved. To surrender consciously does not mean to resign yourself. It means choosing which battles deserve your energy and which only drain your soul. It is learning to stop before you break, to give up control without feeling defeated. Because there is a great difference between yielding out of cowardice and yielding out of wisdom. Epictetus said it plainly: some things are within your control, others are not. If you concern yourself with what does not depend on you, you will become a slave. That phrase, as simple as it sounds, is one of the hardest to live by. Because the ego always wants to intervene, to decide, to adjust every detail, even in matters that belong to life itself. Yet the more force you exert on what is uncontrollable, the more tension you build. And sooner or later something breaks: your health, your rest, your relationships, your peace. Conscious surrender is an act of emotional intelligence. It is observing the impulse to control, recognizing it, and calmly releasing it. It is not laziness or indifference. It is active trust. It is saying, "I have done my part. Now I let reality do hers." It is a dance between action and acceptance. Think about it. The farmer plants, waters and tends, but he cannot command the sun to rise or the sky to rain. The sailor adjusts his sails, but he cannot dictate the wind. The wise person acts with precision, but does not demand outcomes. He understands that his power has limits, and within those limits he can find all his freedom. Seneca wrote that, "He who obeys nature will never be poor. He who tries to master it will never be rich." To obey nature is not servitude, it is cooperation. It is recognizing the natural flow of things, accepting that life has rhythms that do not depend on your commands. When you do this, something inside relaxes. You stop fighting the current and begin to swim with it. Conscious surrender is also learning to delegate. How many times have you believed that if you do not do things yourself, they will not be done right? But that belief is not virtue. It is distrust in disguise. Learning to trust others, even knowing they will not do it exactly as you would, is an act of humility. It is allowing life to participate with you instead of trying to replace it. There is a kind of surrender that is not defeat, but clarity. It happens when you understand that you cannot force love, you cannot hurry forgiveness, you cannot control others' opinions, nor stop the passage of time. It happens when you choose to care for what you truly can: your words, your serenity, your presence. Epictetus advised, "Do not wish for events to happen as you want them to. Wish for them to happen as they do, and your life will flow serenely." There is no greater practice than this, because when you stop arguing with reality, you begin to cooperate with it, and then, without realizing it, life becomes less of a battle and more of a conversation. Conscious surrender is not surrendering to others, it is surrendering to truth. It is accepting that existence does not need your permission to flow, that everything has its moment, and that holding tighter does not make anything happen faster. It is the maturity of one who understands that the greatest strength does not always roar, sometimes it sighs. This surrender does not make you smaller, it makes you wise. It allows you to preserve energy for what truly depends on you, your actions, your judgments, your character. And when those are firm, you can release the rest without fear, because you know you are not losing control. You are simply ceasing to waste it. There comes a moment when the soul learns to stop fighting the inevitable. It does not happen suddenly. It arrives like a sigh, like the calm that follows exhaustion. It is the moment when you understand that insisting more will not change anything, that speaking again will not convince, that forcing only fractures. That moment, though it hurts, is the beginning of inner freedom. To surrender consciously is to acknowledge the limits of your power without losing your dignity. It is to look at a situation you cannot change and say, "I accept what is, not because I like it, but because fighting it destroys me." That phrase, when spoken sincerely, has the power of an earthquake that reorders your world. Because you stop wasting your mind on the useless and focus it on what can still bloom. The Stoics did not speak of passive resignation, but of active collaboration with reality. For them, acceptance was not surrender to chaos, but alignment with the natural order of the universe. Marcus Aurelius wrote in his journal, "Love whatever happens to you, for it is woven together with what you are." That acceptance does not mean pleasure, it means understanding. It does not demand that you smile through pain, only that you refuse to hate life for giving it to you. When you practice conscious surrender, you realize that most of what torments you are not tragedies, but unfulfilled expectations. You wanted people to act a certain way, and they didn't. You wanted your job to give you more, your partner to understand more, your body to endure more. And when it didn't happen, you felt anger. But what hurts is not reality. It is your attachment to the version you imagined of it. That is why surrender is a form of purification. It does not erase pain, but it cleanses it of pride. It allows you to feel without drowning, to cry without guilt, to learn without dramatizing. When you accept that something ends, that someone leaves, or that a path closes, you make room for what's new. Obsessive control keeps life out. Conscious surrender invites it in. The ancient sages practiced this surrender in everyday life. They did not wait for tragedy to test it. If the weather changed, they took it as exercise. If they lost an object, they observed their reaction. If someone insulted them, they remembered, "I have no power over his tongue, only over my response." Every day was a training ground for releasing what was beyond their control. True surrender is cultivated in the smallest gestures. When you don't reply to a message meant to provoke you. When you decide not to correct someone who refuses to understand. When you do not interrupt a natural process, whether a conversation, an emotion, or grief, just to end it sooner. These are invisible but powerful acts. Because in that silence you choose, your serenity is built. In a world that glorifies constant action, letting go seems like a crime. But the Stoic knows that sometimes the best action is inaction, that there are battles won by retreating, not by advancing, that the soul that learns to wait calmly is stronger than the one that tries to control through noise. Conscious surrender is the art of keeping the soul open amid disorder. Not because you trust in chance, but because you trust in yourself. Because you know that whatever happens, you will have the strength to adapt, to respond, and to keep walking with dignity. When you reach that point, the world stops feeling like a war and becomes a dialogue. You no longer need everything to happen your way. It is enough to know that whatever comes, you will receive it in balance. There is no greater victory than that. And then, without fanfare or applause, you discover that surrender was your highest form of mastery, that you lost nothing by letting go. On the contrary, you recovered everything that matters, your calm, your clarity, and your power to choose with reason. Seventh Stoic lesson: see the world as a collaborator, not an enemy. The problem is not the world, but the way you look at it. You believe that everything conspires against you, that people exist to complicate your life, that obstacles are placed deliberately in your path. You have turned your environment into a battlefield and life into a war without truce. But the enemy is not outside, it lives within. It is your perception of constant threat. As long as you see the world as an adversary, you will live on guard, tense, exhausted, measuring every step as if walking through traps. The Stoics knew this attitude is the root of most of our suffering. Epictetus explained it precisely. Things themselves don't hurt us, but our opinions about them do. When you believe everything attacks you, your body prepares to resist. Your mind arms itself. Your gestures harden. You live ready to fight, not to understand. And that perpetual war drains your energy, your relationships, and your clarity. Seeing the world as a collaborator does not mean being naive. It does not deny that conflicts or injustices exist. It means understanding that even stumbles and losses can serve you if you interpret them wisely. Every difficulty is a conversation that life proposes to train you. Marcus Aurelius said it without drama. What stands in the way becomes the way. Life is not against you. It simply isn't designed to please you. When you change the way you look, the world changes with you. The same person you once called an obstacle becomes a mirror showing you your impatience or your pride. The same situation that seemed unfair teaches you to strengthen your prudence or temperance. Everything that happens can be an ally if you take it as a teacher. Hostility is born from interpretation. If you see offense, there will be offense. If you see training, there will be learning. That is the freedom of the rational soul, to decide how to read reality. Those who live in complaint multiply enemies. Those who live in cooperation find lessons. The Stoic does not seek a tame world, but a strong character. because when you strengthen your inner self, no difficulty can corrupt you. Imagine for a moment that the universe does not move against you, but with you. That even what hurts today is, in some way, rearranging something in your life. That possibility, small as it seems, has the power to change how you move through the world. It takes you out of fear and into understanding. Living in cooperation with the world does not mean stopping action. It means acting without resentment. It means responding, not reacting. It means understanding that life owes you no ease. It gives you raw material to grow, and you decide whether to use it as weight or as fuel. The ancient sages spoke of universal sympathy, the idea that everything is connected and works in harmony, even what we don't understand. Seeing that restores your trust in the natural order of things. Not a perfect or indulgent order, but one that, in its own way, seeks balance. And when you discover that silent harmony, the struggle fades. Not because the world becomes easy, but because you become clear. You no longer ask, why me, but what for? You stop shouting against the current and learn to row with it. That is the shift from control to understanding, from fear to serenity. When your mind stops seeing enemies, life becomes less harsh. Not because the environment changes, but because you stop responding violently to what you don't understand. Cooperation with the world begins in the mind. It is an internal act before it becomes an external one. When you choose not to fight every fact, you regain the energy you once wasted resisting. You learn that acceptance is not surrender. It is alignment with reality so you can use its force in your favor. The Stoic lives in communion with the natural order. He knows that rain does not fall to inconvenience him, that traffic does not form to frustrate him, that people do not exist to test his patience. All of it simply happens, and what depends on him is the interpretation he gives it. Seneca said it clearly, "The wise man does not grieve over things he cannot avoid." That phrase, more than a moral maxim, is a tool of emotional survival. To live at war with the world is to live exhausted, but when you accept that life is not designed to please you, you discover a new serenity. Because you no longer expect things to be different, you take them as they are and adapt. That is when true freedom is born, the freedom to act without anger and respond without fear. Cooperating with the world is not a call to passivity, but to intelligence. It means learning to move with strategy, not impulse. If a door closes, you find another. If someone betrays you, you learn to protect yourself without turning to stone. If a plan fails, you review, adjust, and continue. The wise person doesn't dramatize, he evaluates, because he knows every event has something to teach him, even when it hurts. When you reach this state of inner cooperation, something also changes in your relationships. You begin to look at others with less suspicion and more understanding. You realize everyone is struggling with their own chaos, that no one acts from nothing but from their story. That understanding doesn't excuse behavior, but it liberates you. It lets you coexist without carrying the poison of resentment. The world is not a battlefield, it's a workshop, and you are an apprentice. Every day the universe hands you new materials, a disappointment, a misunderstanding, an unexpected event, and asks what you'll do with them. You can complain and throw them away, or you can take them and build your character with them. That is the daily Stoic practice, to turn adversity into nourishment. Marcus Aurelius expressed it with almost superhuman calm. Whatever happens, happens at the right time. That sentence holds a deep truth. The universe doesn't err in its rhythm. It's we who rush it or condemn it for not fitting our desires. Cooperation begins when you realize you don't need to understand everything to trust. If you stop seeing the world as an enemy, you won't need to live in defense mode anymore. You'll begin to observe, to listen, to learn. You'll see that even pain has a function, and that most of your battles were ghosts raised by your own mind. That is where control dissolves and serenity appears. Not because you mastered life, but because you learned to walk beside it. And in the end, when you look back, you understand that the world was never a cage or a trap. You were the one who closed the door out of fear. Now, with a clearer mind and a calmer heart, you can step out, not to fight, but to cooperate, not to conquer, but to live in harmony. That is the lesson of this key. The world is not against you. It is simply waiting for you to stop pushing it. Eighth Stoic lesson: learn to wait without anxiety. Impatience is the open wound of the modern soul. You live expecting everything to happen now, that others respond immediately, that results arrive without delay. Every minute of waiting feels like punishment, like loss, like an affront to your control. But the truth is that you don't know how to wait because you've confused time with immediacy. You've forgotten that everything that truly matters, serenity, mastery, trust, real love, ripens in silence, not in haste. Epictetus warned that anxiety arises when we want things to happen before their time. It is the desperate attempt to accelerate the natural course of life. The impatient person does not suffer because of what is missing, but because they cannot tolerate the rhythm of what is already on its way. And in that desperation, they break, because anxiety is a form of impatience with destiny, a rebellion against the order of things. Waiting without anxiety is an art, but also a discipline. It requires unlearning the addiction to constant stimulation. It demands returning to the essential: silence, observation, trust in the process. The Stoic understands that nature does not improvise, that every fruit has its season, every change its rhythm, every lesson its time. Forcing the clock only brings frustration. Seneca put it with his usual clarity: nothing is lost by waiting for what must come. That phrase holds deep wisdom. What is meant to arrive will do so when you are prepared to receive it, not before. The problem is that most of the time, you don't wait. You burn yourself out trying to control the when, the how, and the why. You project yourself into what is beyond your reach, and in that effort, you lose the very calm you seek. Anxiety makes you live in a future that doesn't exist. It is a mind that refuses to rest, a heart that beats to the rhythm of fear. But when you wait without anxiety, you discover that life isn't taking anything from you, it's training you to hold what is coming. Learning to wait is learning to trust that invisible processes are also work, that even when nothing seems to be happening, something is being ordered within you. Stoicism teaches not to measure life by immediate results, but by the quality of your practice. If you acted with virtue today, you already won, even if the fruit takes time to appear. Impatience wants applause, wisdom wants progress. The first demands speed, the second consistency. Waiting without anxiety doesn't mean standing still. It means moving at the pace of reason, not urgency. Imagine for a moment that the universe keeps a different clock from yours, that it never arrives late, only on time. That delay is not a flaw, but part of the plan. That shift in perspective transforms your relationship with time, because you stop chasing what's missing and begin to inhabit what is already here. Waiting ceases to be torture and becomes trust. The anxious soul seeks certainty, the serene soul seeks understanding. The more you try to rush events, the further you push them away. But if you wait with attention, without clinging, time becomes your ally. Waiting turns into wisdom, knowing that not everything is in your hands, but that your way of enduring the wait always is. Patience is not passivity, it is contained power. It is the energy conserved in silence, while others exhaust themselves running after what is not yet ready. In a world that glorifies speed, the one who knows how to wait becomes dangerous, because their calm unsettles. They do not despair, they do not overreact, they do not beg for signs. They simply observe, act when it's time, and stay quiet when noise adds nothing. That calm is not weakness, it is mastery. It is knowing that everything you rush, you break. When you learn to wait without anxiety, you realize that hurry was always an illusion of control. You thought that rushing would get you there sooner, when in fact it only made you miss the journey. There is no slower road than the one walked in distress. The Stoic doesn't accelerate destiny, he harmonizes with it. He knows that life follows an unseen logic, and that the most enduring fruits are those that ripen in silence while no one watches. Each time anxiety pushes you to anticipate, remember this: the moment you are living is also part of the process. It's not an obstacle, it's exactly the stage you need to be in. If life asks for stillness, it's because something in you still needs to mature before moving forward. What is ready doesn't need to be forced. It simply happens. What is forced, even if it arrives, breaks. Waiting is not easy because it forces you to look inward. It leaves you alone with your thoughts, your lacks, your fears. But that is where temperance is trained, in the discomfort of silence, in the slowness of time, in the emptiness you fear so much. Whoever learns to stay still without losing their center conquers something few achieve, the freedom of not depending on the world's pace. The Stoics did not flee from time, they inhabited it. They didn't see it as an enemy slipping away, but as a teacher. Waiting without anxiety doesn't mean conforming. It means learning to listen to what time is saying. It means trusting that the universe is not denying you anything. It's simply preparing what you're not yet ready to sustain. Meanwhile, your duty remains the same. Act with virtue, think clearly, live calmly. Seneca wrote, "He who has patience with time has everything he desires." Not because time grants favors, but because he who masters waiting ceases to be a slave to outcomes. He no longer needs things to happen to feel at peace, because his peace no longer depends on the calendar, it depends on his character. That is the difference between living in anxiety and living in serenity. The anxious wait for the world to change. The wise change their attitude toward the world. Learning to wait without anxiety is learning to breathe again within the present. It is understanding that hurry steals depth, and that the fullest life is not the fastest, but the most conscious. Just as the river does not rush to reach the sea, you too need not force the course of things. It is enough to flow with integrity and let destiny play its part. When you stop measuring progress by speed and start measuring it by the serenity with which you face waiting, you'll know you are truly moving forward. Waiting without anxiety is not surrender. It is trust that you are exactly where you are meant to be. And when that day comes, and it will, you'll understand that what looked like delay was really a form of inner refinement. Time was never making you wait. It was preparing you. Ninth Stoic lesson: choose trust over vigilance. The need to watch everything is born of fear, the quiet fear that whispers that if you don't control, you'll lose, that if you don't look, you'll be deceived, that if you don't intervene, everything will collapse. Yet that constant vigilance doesn't protect. It sickens. It kills peace, withers relationships, and turns the mind into a besieged fortress. There is no rest where there is distrust. There is no love where everything is suspected. There is no serenity where every detail feels like a threat. Excessive control is the shadow of a deeper insecurity, the inability to trust, not only in others, but in life itself. The one who cannot trust lives exhausted because every moment becomes an act of survival. They wake up alert, work alert, love alert, and in that perpetual alertness, they burn out the most valuable thing they have, inner calm. Seneca knew this, which is why he warned that obsessive vigilance is not prudence. It is fear disguised as responsibility. The Stoic sage doesn't watch to dominate, but to understand. He doesn't waste himself trying to control what lies beyond his reach. He invests his energy in governing his judgment, refining his perception, and cultivating the virtue that allows him to discern when to act and when to let go. He knows that life is not managed like a chessboard, and that people are not pieces to be moved by his will. For the Stoic, trust is not naivete, it is strength. When you choose to trust, you expose yourself, you know this, but you also choose to set yourself free. Because there is no freedom without risk, no love without vulnerability. Trust does not guarantee that everything will go well. It guarantees that whatever happens, your soul will remain whole. It is the decision not to let suspicion poison you. It is seeing others with clarity, not paranoia. It is living with the quiet confidence that even if you are betrayed, you will still be yourself, centered, calm, uncorrupted. Excessive vigilance, on the other hand, creates the very thing it fears. The more you try to control, the more distant you become. The more you distrust, the more fragile the bond grows. The one who lives watching for betrayal ends up summoning it. What begins as protection becomes a prison, and the cruelest part is that this prison is of your own making, built brick by brick out of thoughts that say, "I'm just being careful." The Stoics taught that trust is not something you give, it is something you practice. It isn't a spontaneous feeling, it is a conscious act. Trust doesn't mean closing your eyes to reality. It means learning to see it without distortion. It means accepting that others have the right to err, to act from their own judgment, to be different without that being a threat to you. Trust arises from self-mastery, from knowing that you can stay upright even when the world doesn't behave as you expect. In a world obsessed with surveillance of phones, of networks, of other people's minds, trusting is a revolutionary act. It is choosing not to live on defense. It is allowing life to unfold without your constant supervision. It is resting in the certainty that you don't need to know everything to be at peace. Trust is the breath of reason, the space that lets serenity in. Seneca wrote that nothing is more honest than trust, and nothing more base than constant suspicion, because the one who suspects everything ends up corrupting even what is good. The distrustful mind doesn't see facts, it sees threats. It doesn't hear words, it reads traps. It doesn't love, it analyzes. And in that endless vigilance, the possibility of true connection withers. The Stoic would rather be wrong by trusting than be right by fearing, because he knows that trust doesn't make him weak. It makes him free, free from control, free from resentment, free from the poison of suspicion. He chooses to trust not because the world is safe, but because his spirit already is. Trust, even when your voice trembles, even when your mind warns you not to, because trust is not naivete. It is courage. It is looking at risk and still choosing not to live, chained to fear. Seneca understood that the soul grows sick when it doubts everything, when every gesture must be verified, when love becomes interrogation. That illness isn't cured by more control, but by more acceptance. Learning to trust doesn't mean closing your eyes. It means opening your heart without handing the wheel to fear. It means accepting that not everything depends on you, that the world is not under your command, and that people are not here to either confirm or disappoint you. When you trust, the soul breathes again, because it no longer has to monitor every movement to feel safe. Constant vigilance is exhausting. It turns life into a silent war against uncertainty, but uncertainty is not the enemy. It is the natural ground where virtue blooms. Think of a sailor who, distrusting the wind, tries to control it. His ship lurches, his body tenses, his mind despairs. But the wise one adjusts his sails and trusts the movement of the air. Not because the wind is predictable, but because his goal is not to dominate it. It's to move with it. Life is the same. To trust is not to surrender, but to cooperate with what you cannot control. The one who watches everything ends up alone, not because others abandon them, but because no one can breathe under the weight of control. Relationships break not because of betrayal, but because of the suspicion that precedes it. When you make control your language, you kill dialogue. When you make vigilance your refuge, you exile intimacy. That's why the Stoics said trust is a form of charity. To give others the benefit of the doubt, knowing they might fail you, is an act of nobility. Seneca, in his letters to Lucilius, wrote that the serenity of the soul is shown in the ability to live without doubting everything. The mind that suspects every word, that searches for hidden meanings in every gesture, lives enslaved by its own judgment. But the mind that opens itself to trust, even amid uncertainty, demonstrates its inner strength. There is no wisdom without trust, because only the one who trusts can listen, learn and love without being on guard. Trust, even when the past has taught you otherwise, not because others have changed, but because you have. You have learned to stand, not to crumble under disappointment, not to let fear dictate your movements. That is true freedom, not needing certainty to feel at peace. The one who constantly seeks proof lives under a contract with anxiety. The one who trusts, on the other hand, dwells in the faith of the present. It's not about trusting blindly in everyone, it's about trusting lucidly in yourself, in your discernment, in your ability to respond with calm if things go wrong. Once you understand that you can survive disappointment, you stop fearing it. Once you see that another's betrayal cannot destroy your integrity, you no longer need to watch them. That is the strength of the wise, not his power to foresee, but his serenity to endure. Trust doesn't mean everything will go well. It means you will be well, even if everything falls apart, because your stability doesn't depend on the behavior of others, but on the inner balance you cultivate every day. Every time you choose to trust instead of suspect, you free yourself a little more from the invisible yoke of fear. Constant vigilance is voluntary slavery. Trust, on the other hand, is sovereignty. You govern your spirit and let the rest follow its natural course. Stoicism doesn't ask you to be naive. It asks you to be wise. And wisdom, in its purest form, expresses itself as serene trust. It is not the faith of closed eyes, but the peace of open eyes that choose not to live afraid. Seneca summed it up brilliantly. Nothing belongs to us more than the tranquility of the soul. And tranquility only grows where vigilance ends. Trust the flow of life. Trust that even if something breaks, you will not. Trust that every disappointment can become a lesson and every loss a form of freedom. Trust is a choice you renew each day. Every time you breathe before suspecting, every time you listen before judging, every time you choose to understand before controlling. The next time you feel the need to watch over everything, remember this. The one who controls out of fear loses even what he tries to protect. But the one who trusts through reason keeps his soul intact. And there is no greater victory than that. 10th, Stoic lesson, make the present your anchor. We spend most of our lives absent. We walk, work, and love, but our mind is always somewhere else, on what's missing, on what could happen, on what has already passed. We live divided between nostalgia and anticipation, dragging guilt from the past and fears of the future, without realizing that the only moment that truly belongs to us is happening right now, and yet we waste it trying to control what has already escaped or what hasn't yet arrived. Epictetus said it plainly, "Do not seek for things to happen as you wish, but wish for things to happen as they do." That is the essence of serenity. It is not resignation, it is lucid presence. Obsessive control arises from a mind that cannot tolerate the emptiness of the present moment, that needs to project itself forward to feel safe. But that illusion of security is the worst thief of life. It steals your ability to inhabit yourself. When you make the present your anchor, you stop being dragged by the currents of what if or I should have. You learn to observe without fleeing. Control loses meaning because you realize there is nothing to control when you are simply being. Seneca understood it with disarming clarity. It is not that we have little time, but that we waste much. We lose it calculating, comparing, trying to anticipate every step, when wisdom lies in stopping, breathing, and accepting that the moment is enough. Control is a disguised form of fear, fear of loss, of uncertainty, of death. But the now is the only space where those fears dissolve, because in the present there is no future to dread and no past to regret. There is only breath, body, awareness. The Stoics saw this instant as the soil where virtue grows, to act rightly here and now, without postponing excellence for tomorrow. The wise man does not promise. He acts. He does not plan endlessly. He lives. If you learn to anchor yourself in the present, every action becomes complete. There is no rush because there is no goal higher than this breath. There is no anxiety because the result has not yet happened. There is no guilt because the past exists only as memory. This way of living is not escape, it is practice. It is mental training to remain still, even when the mind screams to run. In the Stoic tradition, the present was the meeting point between reason and nature. Marcus Aurelius wrote in his Meditations, "Do not let the future disturb you, for you will meet it, if you must, with the same weapons of reason, which arm you today against the present." What the emperor meant is simple and radical. The only real thing is what you are doing now. Everything else, worry, fear, control, is imagination. Every time you try to control the future, you separate yourself from your center. The future cannot be controlled because it doesn't yet exist. Trying to do so is like trying to grab the sun's reflection on water. The tighter you hold, the more it scatters. But if you learn to look, not to seize, the reflection illuminates you effortlessly. The present works the same way. When you watch it calmly, it reveals its beauty and natural order. Make the present your anchor, not because it makes you invulnerable, but because it makes you real. The mind that inhabits the now is free. It doesn't need guarantees. It doesn't fear losing control. It doesn't demand that things be different. It simply acts with virtue in what it faces. That is the secret of Stoic balance, understanding that you cannot control events, but you can control the way you face them. Living in the present is an act of courage. It means accepting life without filters, without embellishments, without the security of tomorrow. It means looking at yourself without distraction, without justification. In that silence, you discover there is nothing more to do than to be, and in that being, you have everything: calm, clarity, mastery. Pause for a moment. Listen to the sounds around you. Feel your breath, the weight of your body, the temperature of the air against your skin. That is life, not the promises, not the plans, not the expectations yet to be fulfilled. What you are feeling right now is all you have, and paradoxically all you need. Everything else is noise, projections of a mind afraid it will disappear if it stops anticipating. But the soul does not fade in silence, it reveals itself. For the Stoic, the present is a training ground. Every day, every gesture, every word is an opportunity to practice virtue. There is no tomorrow where you will become better. There is only this moment where you can act with wisdom, temperance, justice, or courage. That's why Epictetus said, "Do you wish to be invincible? Then fight for nothing that is not your own, and nothing is less your own than the past or the future. Your power lies here, in how you choose to respond." The most common mistake of the modern soul is living on delay, constantly postponing calm, love, gratitude, waiting for the perfect day to feel complete. But that day never comes, because it doesn't exist outside this moment. Seneca warned centuries ago, while we are postponing, life speeds by. You don't lose control by releasing the future, you regain it, because the only thing that can be controlled is your attitude now. Practicing presence isn't easy, but it is transformative. Start with the small things, observe without judging, listen without replying, breathe without hurry. When you are truly here, the need to manipulate everything disappears. You realize the world moves on its own, with or without your anxiety, and that nature's order is wiser than your plans. That surrender is not weakness, it is embodied wisdom. Make it your habit. Every time your mind starts to run after control, after the "what if it goes wrong" or "I should have done it differently," return to your body, to the present. Ask yourself, what can I do now? Not tomorrow, not later, now. That question is a compass. It pulls you out of the labyrinth of thought and brings you back to action. Because the present is not something to be debated. It is something to be lived. In the now, there are no masks. Everything you pretend to survive dissolves. Only the essential remains. You, your breath, your awareness. That is where the Stoic finds freedom, not in mastering the world, but in mastering perception. Marcus Aurelius called it the inner citadel, that space nothing can invade while your reason stays firm and your heart serene. And then, when you finally let go, something happens. Reality becomes clearer, people less threatening, mistakes less grave. You discover you don't need to control because you can trust, not necessarily in others, but in your own capacity to adapt, to respond with virtue, to remain whole. That trust, born of presence, is the true power of the wise. You are not here to gain control, but to lose fear. Because once you do, you no longer need things to be a certain way to be at peace. You can face chaos without losing yourself, see imperfection without fleeing. At that point, control no longer matters. The present becomes your refuge, your anchor, your silent teacher. When you understand this, you stop chasing calm. You embody it. You no longer search for it in promises or methods. You find it in the simple fact of being here. Each breath becomes a prayer, each gesture a meditation. And if you ever feel again that everything is falling apart, remember, nothing truly collapses while you remain within yourself. Stoicism doesn't teach you to control life, but to live it with lucidity. That is the art of anchoring yourself in the present, allowing time to flow without dragging you, acting with virtue without the need for guarantees, living without fear of losing what was never yours. Because in the end, everything you have and everything you are happens now. The art of letting go of what was never yours. There comes a moment when the mind grows tired of fighting, not because it has lost, but because it finally understands there was never a real battle. Control, that God we worship without realizing it, was always an illusion. We believed we could tame chaos, shape people, anticipate the turns of fate. But life, silent and steady, has a way of showing us that everything held too tightly eventually breaks. What if it was never about gaining power, but about learning to trust? Not in others, not in the future, but in the invisible force that has kept you standing, even when you swore you couldn't anymore. Maybe control is nothing more than a mask for fear, a way to disguise our fragility. But beneath that fear lies something deeper, a serene certainty that you don't need to have everything figured out to be at peace. Look back for a moment. How many things that once obsessed you no longer matter? How many times did you think the world was ending? And yet it went on. The river of life doesn't wait for those who try to stop it. It drags you if you cling, but it carries you if you learn to float. The wise do not fight the current. They swim with it, accepting its rhythm and direction. In that way, pain turns into knowledge, and uncertainty becomes a teacher. Seneca said that man's greatest freedom lies in accepting fate, not in resignation, but in cooperation with the inevitable. What happens, happens, with or without your permission. But how you move through it, that depends entirely on you. You can resist and break, or you can observe, learn, and transform. That is true control, mastery over yourself, not over the world. And perhaps there lies the secret we've been seeking all along. It's not about letting everything go, but about holding only what is truly yours, your decisions, your calm, your virtue. Everything else, let it pass. People, outcomes, certainties, they are not possessions, they are stations. Those who cling to every train end up living on the platform of the past. What if serenity wasn't the absence of chaos, but a different way of seeing it? Once you understand that, life stops feeling like a series of tests and becomes a practice. Each day is an exercise in humility, a reminder that you are not the owner of the world, only its temporary witness. You are not here to control everything, but to understand yourself within it. There is beauty in what you cannot control. In the sunrise you didn't schedule, in the smile you didn't expect, in the silence that arrives when you stop demanding answers. Maybe that is freedom, accepting the mystery without running from it, without manipulating it, without naming it. And if there is one thing you should take from all this, let it be this. Do not fear chaos, for it doesn't come to destroy you. It comes to return you to yourself. Do not fear letting go, for what leaves was never yours. Do not fear surrender, for sometimes surrender is the highest form of wisdom. When you learn to do this, you won't feel as though you've lost anything. You'll feel, for the first time, that you've come back to yourself. If this reflection resonated with you, don't let it pass as just another thought. Carry it with you, practice it, embody it. And when you feel yourself reaching for control again, remember, life is not to be dominated. It is to be honored. Thank you for coming this far. Thank you for daring to let go. Thank you for listening. Your voice is essential here. Every reflection strengthens and elevates our community, reflecting the true value of each individual and contributing to our shared Stoic identity. The reflection that receives the most support will be set as the standard of this community of Stoic minds, a community that does not flee from pain but walks through it with courage, with wisdom, with honor. We will see each other in our next gathering at Stoicism for Winners, where we will continue exploring the riches of Stoic wisdom applied to modern life. Now, take the opportunity to deepen your Stoic practice with new recommended podcast sessions. Follow us so you don't miss any reflection that could help you at just the moment when everything feels overwhelming. Every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, we publish episodes designed to accompany you when life feels heavy, when it's hard to stay calm, when you need a word to remind you who you are. Not following us is to risk missing exactly that lesson that could bring back the peace you have been seeking. Until we meet again, remember, you are the sole owner of your perception, the creator of your peace, and the warrior of your own battle. This is the legacy of Stoicism, the art of being invincible.